Struggling Cowboy rescued a widow until she recognized him as her husband's killer. Clara Morrison pressed her dead husband's rifle against the stranger's chest and whispered, "Give me one reason not to pull this trigger," never knowing she was pointing the gun at the man who'd made her a widow. The wind carried dust and the smell of dying things across Clara Morrison's land, and she tasted both on her cracked lips as she watched the rider approach through the heat shimmer. Her hands trembled around the stock of Daniel's old Winchester, the metal warm from where she'd been gripping it for the better part of an hour, waiting. Strangers meant trouble out here, 40 miles from the nearest town, and trouble was something she couldn't afford. Not with Tommy's ribs showing through his shirt and the last of their flour gone 3 days ago. The man on horseback moved slow and careful, his hat pulled low against the sun. His horse was lean, but not starved, which meant he had money or knew how to find food, and Clara couldn't decide which made him more dangerous. She stepped back into the shadow of her cabin's doorway, the rifle's weight familiar in her arms, and felt Tommy press against her leg like a scared pup. "Mama," the boy whispered, his voice thin as creek water in August. "Is it Papa coming home?" The question hit her chest like a fist, same as it did every time. 3 years Tommy had been asking that question. In 3 years, she'd been swallowing the answer that would break what was left of his heart. "No, baby," she said, keeping her eyes on the stranger. "Papa ain't coming home." The rider stopped at the edge of what used to be their vegetable garden, now just rows of cracked earth and stubborn weeds. He sat his horse quiet for a long moment, studying the broken fence posts and the cabin's sagging roof, the missing shingles that let rain pour into their one room like tears through a widow's fingers. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice carrying the dust of long roads. "Don't mean no harm. Just wondered if you might spare some water for my horse." Clara stepped into the doorway where he could see her, the rifle pointed steady at his chest. Up close, she could make out more details. A face weathered by wind and sun, eyes that seemed to carry weight beyond his years, clothes that had seen better days but weren't quite ragged. His hands rested easy on his saddle horn, no movement toward the gun at his hip. "Water costs," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "What you got to trade?" The stranger's gaze moved from her face to Tommy peering around her skirt, then to the broken plow rusting beside the cabin, the collapsed chicken coop, the well with its fraying rope. When his eyes came back to hers, something in them made her chest tight. "I got hands at work," he said. "Got a strong back and tools in my saddlebag. Could fix that roof before the next rain comes through." "And then what?" Clara's finger found the trigger. "You fix my roof, and then take everything I got left. Then I move on." His voice was quiet, certain. "Give you my word, ma'am. Just looking to earn an honest meal and maybe sleep in your barn. Been riding hard for days." Clara studied his face, searching for the lie she was sure lived there. But all she saw was exhaustion that matched her own, a bone-deep tiredness that came from carrying burdens too heavy for one person. Behind her, Tommy's stomach growled loud enough to echo off the cabin walls, and shame burned her cheeks. The stranger heard it too. His eyes softened, and he reached slow into his saddlebag, drawing out a small cloth bundle. "Got some jerky here," he said, "for the boy." No trade needed. Clara's throat closed up. 3 years of neighbors who turned away when she asked for help. 3 years of storekeepers who wouldn't extend credit. 3 years of watching her son grow thin while she rationed their dwindling supplies. And here was a stranger offering food to her child without being asked. "Why?" she whispered. The man was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his words came soft as rain on dry earth. "Because somebody should." Clara lowered the rifle, not all the way, but enough. The stranger dismounted slow and careful, keeping his hands visible, and walked his horse to the well. He drew water with practiced movements, letting the animal drink before filling his own canteen. "Name's Jack," he said, not looking at her. "Clara." She paused. "This is Tommy." Jack nodded to the boy, who had crept closer, drawn by the smell of the jerky still wrapped in Jack's hand. "Pleasure, Tommy. You really gonna fix our roof?" the boy asked. Jack glanced at Clara, waiting for permission. She found herself nodding, though every instinct screamed against trust. "I am," Jack said, handing Tommy the jerky. Might take a few days to do it right. As Tommy tore into the dried meat with hungry desperation, Clara watched Jack unsaddle his horse with the smooth motions of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. There was something in the careful way he worked, the respectful distance he kept, that made her think maybe, just maybe, the first stranger to show kindness in 3 years might actually be what he claimed. She didn't know that Jack's hands shook as he loosened his horse's cinch, or that his offer to help came from a guilt so deep it had carved hollow places in his chest. She didn't know that he'd been searching for a family for months, driven by a debt he could never truly repay. And she certainly didn't know that the man now watering her dying garden had pulled the trigger that made her a widow, but that his kindness came not from the goodness of his heart, but from the terrible weight of what he'd done. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon as Jack Morrison, though he hadn't given his full name, set to work on the roof that belonged to the woman whose husband he'd killed. And in the gathering dusk, neither Clara nor her son could have imagined that mercy and guilt could wear the same face. Jack Morrison watched the widow's son carve his first whistle from cottonwood, teaching the boy skills his own father should have passed down, never telling Tommy that those same hands had pulled the trigger that orphaned him. The sound of Jack's hammer against the cabin roof became the heartbeat of Clara's days. Each strike rang out across the prairie like a promise being kept, steady and sure, and for the first time in 3 years she woke without dread sitting heavy on her chest. Tommy followed Jack around like a shadow with legs, his small hands mimicking every movement, the way Jack tested each nail before driving home, how he measured twice and cut once, the careful attention he paid to corners and joints that would bear the weight of winter snow. The boy's hunger had eased with regular meals, but his hunger for a man's attention seemed deeper than his stomach had ever been. "Why you do it like that?" Tommy asked on the 4th morning, watching Jack playing a board smooth with long, patient strokes. "Because rushing makes for sloppy work," Jack said, not looking up from his task. "And sloppy work fails when you need it most." Clara paused in hanging laundry to watch them together. Something in Jack's voice when he spoke to Tommy carried an ache she recognized, the sound of a man who'd lost something precious and found an echo of it in her son's eager questions. She told herself not to wonder what Jack had lost, not to let her heart soften toward a stranger who would move on when the work was done. But softening seemed to happen without her permission, like seeds taking root in ground she'd thought was barren. Jack worked from dawn until the heat became unbearable, then again in the evening until darkness swallowed the prairie. In between, he helped Tommy with small tasks, repairing the chicken coop that had collapsed in last spring's storm, teaching him to whittle with Daniel's old pocket knife, showing him how to read the sky for weather signs their father never had the chance to pass down. "See how them clouds build up tall like castles," Jack said one afternoon, pointing west where thunderheads gathered like gray mountains. "That means rain, but also wind. Storms coming hard and fast." Tommy squinted at the horizon, his face serious with concentration. "How you know so much about everything?" Jack's hands stilled on the rope he was coiling. For a moment his face went distant, like he was seeing something beyond the prairie sky. "A man learns what he needs to survive," he said finally. "Sometimes he learns it the hard way." That evening, as the storm Jack had predicted lashed the cabin with rain and wind, Clara watched him stare out the single window at the lightning splitting the sky. The glass turned his reflection ghostly, and she saw something in his face that made her chest tight, a pain so deep it seemed carved into his bones. "You got family somewhere?" she asked quietly. Tommy slept curled in his corner, exhausted from a day of learning and laughter. Jack's reflection startled, like he'd forgotten she was there. "Had a brother once. Lost him some years back. I'm sorry. Was my fault." The words came out flat, matter of fact, but Clara heard the weight they carried. "Lots of things been my fault." She wanted to ask more, but something in his posture warned her off. Instead, she poured coffee from the pot that had been brewing over their small fire and handed him a cup without speaking. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to rain drum against the new shingles Jack had nailed down that afternoon. The fever came on Tommy sudden and fierce 3 days later. Clara woke to find him burning hot, his small body shaking with chills that no amount of blankets could stop. His breathing came shallow and quick, and when she tried to give him water, he couldn't keep it down. "It's the lung fever," she whispered, more to herself than to Jack, who knelt beside Tommy's makeshift bed with worry creasing his face. "Took 2 children in town last month." Jack's jaw tightened. "What does he need?" "Medicine. There's a doctor in Centerville," but Clara's voice broke. Centerville was 2 days' hard ride through country that turned deadly in bad weather. "I can't leave him, and I can't afford, I can't." Jack was already moving, gathering his coat and hat. "I'll be back before tomorrow night." "You don't understand." Clara caught his arm. "The storm's not finished. Those creek crossings flood, and if you get lost, I won't get lost." His eyes met hers, steady and sure. "I give you my word." Clara stared at him. This stranger who was offering to risk his life for her son. "Why would you do this? You don't owe us nothing." Jack's face went still, and for a heartbeat she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Maybe I owe more than you know." He left within the hour, riding into wind and rain that bent the prairie grass flat. Clara spent that day and night keeping vigil over Tommy, bathing his fever with cool cloths and whispering prayers she'd stopped believing in years ago. The boy drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling for his papa, sometimes reaching for Jack with small, hot hands. By the second evening, Tommy's breathing had grown so shallow Clara could barely see his chest rise and fall. She held his hand and prepared her heart to lose the last piece of Daniel she had left in this world. That's when she heard hoofbeats through the rain. Jack stumbled through the door looking half dead himself, his clothes soaked through, his face gray with exhaustion. But he carried a small bottle of medicine clutched against his chest like a sacred thing. "Doctor said 2 spoonfuls every 4 hours, he gasped, pressing the bottle into Clara's shaking hands. "Said to keep him warm and get fluids in him when the fever breaks." Clara wanted to ask how he'd made the journey so fast, wanted to demand why he'd risk so much for strangers. Instead, she measured out the medicine with trembling fingers and held it to Tommy's lips. The boy swallowed without waking, and Clara felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, but blooming, like a flower that had waited through winter for the first touch of spring warmth. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack nodded, then collapsed into the chair by the fire, his head falling back against the wood. Within minutes, his breathing evened out in exhausted sleep, and Clara found herself studying his face in the firelight. The hard lines around his eyes, the way his mouth held tension even in sleep, the careful way he kept himself apart even when showing kindness. She thought about the medicine that had cost more than her family made in a month, bought by a drifter who claimed to have nothing. She thought about the risk he'd taken riding through flooding country in a storm. She thought about the way Tommy reached for him and the careful gentleness with which Jack reached back. Most of all, she thought about the pain she'd seen in his reflection and the words he'd spoken. "Maybe I owe more than you know." As Tommy's fever finally broke near dawn, Clara watched Jack sleep by her dying fire and wondered what debts a man could carry that would drive him to such desperate kindness. She had no way of knowing that his guilt ran deeper than any gratitude she could offer, or that every act of mercy only carved the wound in his heart a little deeper. The wanted poster fluttered from the preacher's saddlebag like a dying bird, and Claire Morrison's world shattered when she saw her husband's killer had been living under her roof, eating at her table, and teaching her son to carve wood with those same murderous hands. The traveling preacher arrived on a Tuesday morning when the air hung still and heavy, carrying the promise of another scorching day. Clara watched him ride up the newly beaten path to her cabin, noting the way his horse moved easy and well-fed, the way his black coat sat crisp despite the dust and heat. Behind her, Jack hammered the last shingles onto the barn roof, the sound sharp and steady in the morning quiet. "Morning, sister," the preacher called out, touching the brim of his hat. "Reverend Samuel Hayes, bringing the word of the Lord to those who hunger for salvation." Clara wiped flour from her hands on her apron, conscious of how much better her homestead looked now. The straight fence posts, the mended chicken coop, the vegetable garden showing the first green shoots of hope. "Morning, Reverend. We don't have much, but you're welcome to water and a meal if you're hungry. The Lord provides through generous hearts like yours," Hayes said, dismounting with the careful movements of a man who'd spent long hours in the saddle. "I bring news from the settlements, word of God's work in these troubled times." Tommy came running from the barn, his face bright with the health that had returned after his fever broke. "Mama, Jack says I can help him with the new gate if—" He stopped short when he saw the stranger, suddenly shy. "This is my son, Tommy," Clara said. "Tommy, this is Reverend Hayes." The preacher smiled, but his eyes moved past the boy to where Jack worked on the barn roof, silhouetted against the morning sky. Something flickered across Hayes's face. Recognition, or maybe just curiosity. "Fine work being done here," Hayes observed. "Your husband's handy with tools." "Jack ain't my husband," Clara said quickly, heat rising in her cheeks. "He's just helping with repairs." "I see." The preacher's tone carried no judgment, but Clara felt the weight of assumption anyway. "Well, the Lord works through willing hands, whoever they belong to." As Clara prepared a simple meal of bread and preserved peaches, Hayes talked of his travels, settlements growing along the railroad, cattle drives bringing prosperity and trouble in equal measure, the ongoing search for dangerous men who thought the frontier offered escape from justice. "Saw some wanted posters in Centerville," he mentioned casually, pulling papers from his saddlebag. "Sheriff asked me to spread word to the outlying homesteads. A lot of desperate men think they can disappear into the territory, but the law has a long reach." Clara barely glanced at the papers Hayes spread on her table, more focused on slicing bread with hands that shook slightly. She'd grown comfortable in the bubble of safety Jack had helped create, almost forgetting that the world beyond her farm still held dangers. It was Tommy who saw it first. The boy had crept closer to look at the pictures, fascinated by the stern faces and bold lettering. His small finger traced one particular poster, and Clara heard him suck in a sharp breath. "Mama," Tommy whispered, his voice strange and tight. "Mama, look." Clara turned, and her heart stopped. Staring back at her from the wanted poster was Jack's face. Younger, harder, but unmistakably him. Above the drawing, bold letters spelled out a name that hit her like a physical blow. Jake Morrison. Wanted for murder. Below that, in smaller print, Daniel Morrison, killed in Abilene. Reward, $500. The bread knife fell from Clara's nerveless fingers, clattering against the floor like breaking glass. The world tilted sideways, and she gripped the table edge to keep from falling. Daniel Morrison. Her husband's name. Her husband, killed by Jake Morrison. Jake Morrison, who'd been calling himself Jack. Jake Morrison, who'd mended her roof and saved her son's life and slept in her barn for 3 weeks while she learned to trust again. "Sister," Reverend Hayes's voice came from very far away. "Are you quite well?" Clara couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Her eyes moved from the poster to the window, where she could see Jake, climbing down from the barn roof, his movements easy and familiar. The same hands that had held medicine to Tommy's lips. The same hands that had pulled the trigger and made her a widow. "Tommy," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Go to your room." "But Mama, ow." The word came out sharp enough to cut, and Tommy scrambled away, sensing the danger in the air. Hayes followed her gaze to the window, understanding dawning on his weathered face. "Sister, if that man is who I think he is, get out." Clara's voice was steady now, cold as winter stone. "Take your papers and get out of my house. I cannot leave you here with a wanted killer. Get out." The preacher gathered his papers with fumbling hands, casting worried glances toward the window. "I'll send help from town. Don't try to face him alone." Clara didn't answer. She was already moving toward the corner where Daniel's rifle waited, her hands steady despite the storm raging in her chest. The front door opened just as Hayes rode away in a cloud of dust and panic. Jack stepped inside, wiping sweat from his brow, a question forming on his lips as he saw Clara standing in the center of the room with the Winchester pointed at his heart. "Clara." His voice was soft, confused. "What's wrong?" She stared at him, This man who'd shown her kindness, who'd saved her son, who'd eaten at her table while she thanked God for sending help when she needed it most. This man who'd killed her husband. Jake Morrison, she said, and watched his face go white as cemetery marble. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The rifle barrel never wavered, pointed steady at the center of his chest. Jack's hands hung loose at his sides, making no move toward his gun, no attempt to run or fight. "How long have you known?" His voice was barely a whisper. "About 2 minutes," Clara said. "How long have you known who I was?" Jack closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, she saw something that might have been relief. "Since the first day? Since I saw your name on the deed papers lying on the table." The words hit her like physical blows. "You knew. You knew you'd kill my husband, and you stayed anyway. You ate my food, slept in my barn, played with my son. Clara, please let me explain." "Explain what?" Her voice cracked like breaking ice. "Explain how you shot down my husband in cold blood? Explain how you came here to finish what you started?" "No." Jack took a step forward, and Clara's finger found the trigger. He stopped, hands raised. "I came to make things right. I came to help." "Help?" Clara's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You helped make me a widow. You helped make Tommy fatherless. What more help could we possibly need?" "Your husband drew first," Jack said quietly. "It was self-defense. Liar. I was trying to walk away from that card game when he called me out. Said I was cheating. Said he wouldn't let a cheat leave with his money. He drew iron, Clara. I didn't have a choice." Clara stared at him, searching for the lie in his face, finding only pain that matched her own. "You had a choice not to kill him. Maybe. But I was young and scared and stupid. And when a man draws on you," Jack's voice broke, "I've regretted that shot every day since. I came here to find his family, to make amends. I never expected. Never expected what? Never expected to find you starving. Never expected to care about you and Tommy the way I do. Never expected to wish I could undo that night and give you back what I took." Clara's hands shook, but the rifle stayed trained on his chest. "You can't undo it. Daniel's gone, and nothing you do will bring him back." "I know." Jack's voice was barely audible. "But I thought maybe I could help you survive without him. Thought maybe that was something. It's not enough. I know that too." They stood facing each other in the cabin that had become a home again, separated by 3 feet of space and an ocean of pain. Outside, Tommy's voice called from somewhere near the creek, innocent and happy, unaware that his world was about to shatter all over again. Clara looked at the man who'd killed her husband and saved her son, who'd mended her roof and broken her heart, who'd shown her kindness while carrying the weight of unforgivable guilt. And for the first time since Daniel died, she didn't know what justice looked like anymore. The rifle trembled in Clara's hands as she stared at the man who'd taken everything from her, then given some of it back in ways she'd never expected. Outside, Tommy's laughter drifted on the morning air, and Clara realized that mercy and vengeance could look exactly the same when filtered through a mother's desperate love. Sheriff Hayes arrived at dawn with a rope and righteous anger, but Clara Morrison stepped between the lawman and her husband's killer, speaking words that would either damn them all or set them free. "This man saved my son's life." Clara held the rifle on Jack through the longest night of her life, neither of them sleeping, neither willing to break the fragile standoff that kept them frozen in her cabin like figures carved from stone. When dawn finally crept through the windows, painting everything pale gray, she heard hoofbeats approaching fast and hard. Sheriff Hayes rode in with 3 deputized men, their faces grim with purpose and their hands resting easy on their guns. Clara watched through the window as they spread out around her cabin, cutting off any chance of escape. "That's him," she heard Reverend Hayes call out from behind the lawman. "Jake Morrison, wanted for murder. The woman's been held hostage all night." Jack's eyes met Clara's across the cabin. "Whatever you decide," he said quietly, "I won't fight it. I won't draw on lawmen, and I won't put you and Tommy in danger." "Jake Morrison," Sheriff Hayes called from outside. "Come out with your hands where we can see them. You're under arrest for the murder of Daniel Morrison." Clara's hands shook around the rifle stock. One word from her, and Jack would walk out that door to face a rope. Justice, swift and final. The man who'd killed her husband would pay with his life, and she could tell Tommy his father had been avenged. But when she opened her mouth, different words came out. "Sheriff Hayes," she called back. "This is Claire Morrison. I need to speak with you." "Mrs. Morrison, are you hurt? Has he harmed you or the boy?" Clara looked at Jack, who stood motionless in the center of her cabin, accepting whatever fate she chose for him. "No," she said. "No, we're not hurt." "Then step away from him, ma'am. We'll handle this." Clara lowered the rifle and walked to the door, feeling Jack's eyes on her back. She stepped outside into the morning light, and four guns swung toward the cabin behind her. Sheriff Hayes was a weathered man with kind eyes and iron in his jaw. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm sorry we couldn't get here sooner. Reverend Hayes said you discovered Morrison's identity last night." "I did. Must have been terrible, learning you'd been harboring your husband's killer." Clara looked back at the cabin, then at the sheriff. "This man," she said slowly, "killed my husband 3 years ago in Abilene." "I won't lie about that." Hayes nodded grimly. "Then you understand why we're here. This man also fixed my roof when it was leaking, mended my fences, brought my farm back from dying." Clara's voice grew stronger. "When my son took fever and nearly died, this man rode through a storm to fetch medicine, risked his life to save a boy he barely knew." "Mrs. Morrison, I'm not finished." Clara stepped forward, and something in her voice made the lawman shift uncomfortably. "You want to know what kind of man Jake Morrison is? He's the kind who could have robbed me blind and ridden away, but instead he worked from dawn to dusk, making my life better. He's the kind who sleeps in a barn and asks for nothing but simple meals. He's the kind who teaches a fatherless boy to whittle and read the weather and stand up straight." Behind her, the cabin door opened. Jack stepped out slowly, his hands raised, his face resigned. Tommy appeared in the doorway behind him, sleep-tousled and confused. "Mama," the boy called. "What's happening? Why do those men have guns?" Clara's throat closed up. She knelt beside her son, taking his small face in her hands. "Tommy, these men want to take Jack away." "What?" Clara looked into her son's innocent eyes, then up at the man who'd killed his father and saved his life. "Because sometimes the world is more complicated than we understand." Tommy looked at Jack, then at the sheriff, then back at his mother. "But Jack's good. He taught me to carve. He fixed our house. He made you smile again. He made you smile again." The words hit Clara like a physical blow, because they were true. For the first time since Daniel died, she'd found herself laughing at something Tommy said, humming while she cooked, going to sleep without tears on her pillow. She stood up and faced Sheriff Hayes again. "I want to know what happens if I don't press charges." "Ma'am, my husband's dead. Jake Morrison killed him. But if I forgive that debt, if I say I don't want him prosecuted, what happens then?" Hayes looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Morrison, the law doesn't work that way. Murder is a crime against the state, not just the family. But without my testimony, what case do you have?" The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. "Not much of one," he admitted. "Card game gone bad. No other witnesses still alive. Your husband buried 3 years past." Clara nodded. "Then I'm not testifying. I'm not pressing charges. This man has more than paid his debt to my family." "Mama, no." Jack's voice was rough with emotion. "You don't have to do this. I killed your husband. I deserve whatever comes." Clara turned to face him. "Maybe you do deserve it. But Tommy doesn't deserve to lose another father figure. And I don't deserve to carry the weight of sending a good man to hang for something that can't be undone. I ain't a good man, Clara. You became one." She looked at the cabin with its straight roof and mended walls, at the garden showing green shoots of hope, at her son who'd learned to laugh again. "Whatever you were before, you became a good man under my roof." Sheriff Hayes removed his hat and ran his fingers through graying hair. "Mrs. Morrison, I understand what this man has done for you, but the law says I have a choice," Clara interrupted. "And I'm making it." She walked to Jack, stopping close enough to see the tears he was trying not to shed. "But you can't stay," she said quietly. "You know that, don't you?" Jack nodded. "I know." "What?" Tommy's voice cracked like his heart was breaking. "Why does Jack have to go?" Clara knelt beside her son again, because sometimes people have to pay for their mistakes in different ways. Jack's mistake was taking your papa away from us. His payment is that he can't stay and be the papa you want him to be. Tommy looked at Jack with eyes too old for his small face. Will you come back someday? Jack's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know, son. I hope so. Sheriff Hayes holstered his gun with visible reluctance. Mrs. Morrison, I hope you understand what you're doing. I understand that justice isn't always about punishment, Clara said. Sometimes it's about letting people prove they can be better than their worst moment. An hour later, Jack Morrison saddled his horse for the last time in Clara's barn. Tommy helped him pack his few belongings, chattering nervously about everything and nothing, trying to fill the silence that felt like goodbye. Clara approached as Jack tightened his cinch, carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper. Food for the road, she said. And this. She handed him Daniel's rifle, the one she'd held on him through the long night. Jack stared at it like she was offering him fire. I can't take this. It's not a gift, Clara said. It's a responsibility. Use it to protect people who need protecting. Use it to be the man you became here, not the man you were before. Jack's hands trembled as he accepted the rifle. Clara, don't say you're sorry again. I'm tired of hearing it. Just promise me you'll live in a way that honors the chance I'm giving you. I promise. Tommy threw his arms around Jack's waist, burying his face against the man's shirt. I'll miss you, he whispered. I'll miss you too, son. More than you know. Jack mounted his horse and looked down at Clara, memorizing her face. Thank you, he said, for everything. For the forgiveness. For showing me there's still good in the world. There's good in you too, Jack. Don't forget that. He nodded, then rode away across the prairie, growing smaller and smaller until he disappeared into the heat shimmer like a dream that had lasted just long enough to change everything. Clara stood in her doorway with Tommy pressed against her side, watching until there was nothing left to see. Around them, the homestead Jack had helped rebuild stood strong and straight, ready to weather whatever storms came next. Mama, Tommy said quietly, did we do the right thing? Clara looked at her son, fed, healthy, loved, and learning to trust the world again despite all the reasons he had not to. She looked at her farm, no longer dying but growing. She looked at the horizon where Jack had disappeared, carrying her forgiveness like a seed that might bloom into redemption somewhere down the long road ahead. I don't know, she said honestly, but mercy felt more right than vengeance. And maybe that's enough. As the dust settled over Clara Morrison's land, she realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or excusing the past. It was about choosing what kind of future to build from the pieces of a broken world. Jack Morrison would carry that choice with him wherever the road led. And perhaps someday, in some distant town where no one knew his name, another family in need would find an unexpected guardian angel with gentle hands and haunted eyes.